Okay, let me know when people are in.
Everybody's in. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Open Show.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Douglas Hill, co-director of Pasadena Photography Arts. Thank you for joining us. We would like to recognize the Tongva and the Chumash, who are the native people of these sacred lands we have come to know as Los Angeles. Open Show is sponsored by Pasadena Photography Arts, a project of the nonprofit Emerge program at Fulcrum Arts. Our mission is to promote diverse photography projects by established and emerging photographers worldwide through in-person and virtual exhibitions. In addition, PPA is committed to sponsoring educational programs by accomplished photography professionals. To achieve the mission, PPA's ongoing programming includes Open Show Pasadena and PPA Forum. We're also in the process of developing new programs, so please stay tuned. Pasadena Photography Arts presents a monthly program here on Zoom. Open Show alternates with Forum each month. As a primarily volunteer organization, we have worked hard to keep the costs of these programs to a minimum, but there are expenses involved. We ask that you donate whatever you can by visiting our website, pasadenaphotographyarts.org, and clicking on one of the donate buttons. For those of you who have not experienced PPA's Forum, since 2011, we have invited photographers and other related professionals to discuss a wide range of topics. Our guests have included Britt Salveson, curator and head of the Wallace Annenberg Photography Department and the Prints and Drawings Department of LACMA, Douglas McCullough, senior curator at the California Museum of Photography, and Ibarionex Perello, host of the Candid Frame Photography podcast, among many others. Most recently, PPA advisor Debbie Arlook moderated an exceptional panel called Exploring What's Possible with Odette England, Hamida Glasgow, Lonnie K. Graham, and Jay Sibylla Smith. While we welcome your donations, we also want your feedback. If you have comments or suggestions, please email us at one of the addresses on our website. The January installment of Forum will be a presentation by PPA's own Derek Goldberg. Tonight's event has been made possible in part through a grant from the Pasadena Arts League. One great way you can help out is by underwriting one of these events yourself. Email us to find out how. I'd like to point out that tonight's presenters have each very generously donated an original print to be raffled off to those members of tonight's audience who have made donations. There's still time if you would like a chance to win one of these handsome and valuable works of art by making a donation via our website anytime before tomorrow morning. You can follow and like us on Facebook and Instagram. And everyone will have an opportunity to type questions and comments into the Zoom chat box whenever you like. The event is also being recorded and will be made available on Pasadena Photography Arts YouTube channel. And now I would like to introduce my fellow PPA advisor and co-host for tonight's event, Ellen Friedlander. Ellen.
Thanks, Doug. Welcome, everybody. We're so happy to have you for Open Show and with our theme, street photography. We have 4 wonderful street photographers, and our first presenter tonight is Jeff Larson, who is from Boston, Massachusetts. Jeff has been doing street photography for almost 40 years, but only recently has been showing his work publicly. His newly self-published book, Sonder, is the culmination of that time. This year, Jeff was a finalist for the Life Framer Street Life Awards, a finalist for the TDM Magazine Awards, the winner of the 10th Annual Mobile Photography Awards in the Street Photography category, and the grand prize winner of the 2020 New York Center for Photographic Art Street Photography Awards. Let us welcome Jeff and his Mass Avenue project. Here you go, Jeff.
Thanks, Ellen. And it's really an honor to be here. Thank you very much. It's greatly appreciated. I thought before I start talking about the Mass Ave project, I'd just talk a little bit about myself because I thought some context might be helpful. As Ellen mentioned, I am both an old photographer, but I'm also a new photographer as well. I've been taking pictures for a very long time, but it's really only been in the last few years that I've dived in. And I have this particular affection for Vivienne Meyer. Hopefully everybody here knows, or a lot of you know who Vivienne Meyer was, but she was a person who worked in anonymity for her life and wasn't really discovered until after she passed. And I kind of feel like I was in a similar vein with that. I spent decades doing my photography and keeping it to myself, and it wasn't until I was encouraged to talk to a gentleman named Bill Franson, who's an educator and a photographer in Boston, and to show him my work. It wasn't until then that I was opened up into knowing more about the photo community and places like the Pasadena Photographic Arts and places like the Griffin Museum in Boston. And that meeting with him really sort of changed things for me. It pushed me toward publishing my book, and it pushed me toward starting this project. And it's really been a great change for me. There's just the last couple of years, I finally had people encouraging me to do my work and supporting people who are close to me, who appreciate my work. And that cup of coffee that I had with Bill was just life-changing. And I often wonder what things would have been like for Vivienne if she had had an opportunity to sort of be open up and to have a community of photographic friends. So anyway, on to the project. I just thought I would talk. So I actually came on to thinking about this project by listening to a show that Barry and X had on the Candid Frame. He was talking to another photographer who had done a project on a street in Portland, Oregon, I think, and he published a book about it. And I noodled with that. I got the book, and it's fantastic. I think it's called The Avenue of Roses, if I remember right. And it was about the time that I was looking through my archive, and I realized that I have a lot of work that's on this particular street in Boston. So Mass Ave, it runs through the city of Boston and through Cambridge and into some western suburbs. It starts in this blue collar sort of industrial section of Boston called Dorchester. And then it runs through some of the most downtrodden and rough neighborhoods around. There's a place on Mass Ave, it's at Mass and Cass, which is Mass Ave and Melnea Cass, which is now really kind of commonly referred to or described as being a public health crisis in the city, where homelessness and drug addiction are just prevalent, and it's visible on the street, and it's this just terribly downtrodden section. And then you just continue on a little bit past that, and Mass Ave runs past these beautiful neighborhoods through Back Bay, and it passes Harvard University and MIT, and just the range of the world that you see on Mass Avenue, just riding a bike or walking is just tremendous. And so I've been working on this project. It is far from complete. I mean, some of the images that you're seeing here are 35 years old. They're on film, and they're back in the olden days. And then some of them are, in fact, several of them are shot on iPhone. I do quite a bit of my work on an iPhone. This image with broken glass is an iPhone image that was taken at the corner of Washington Street and Mass Ave. But it's really for me, it's this section of Boston that just kind of has life for so many different areas. You know, this is very close to this image of the moped doing a wheelie is 1 block away from Mass and Cass, where there's this, again, it's this public health crisis with people living on the streets and in tents, and the city not knowing how to contend with all of the problems that they're having here. I should note, I don't really think of myself as being a documentary photographer. This is not intended to be a documentary work. It's more of an illustration of the area and the city and how they see things. I was listening to it may have been a Barian X this time as well, but there was a quote that I heard from a Harry Guyert, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that name, a photographer, and he said, the quote was, and I'm sure I'll get this wrong, "There is no story, there is only shape and light." And I hadn't heard that before until about a week or so ago, and I started to realize that's really the way I shoot myself. I don't have a story to tell necessarily, but I see shape and light, and I work on projects like Mass Ave, and I think what happens is that story comes out of the images that I end up generating. This image, by the way, is the image that has been donated for the print sale at the end, and this is in Central Square in Cambridge. It's the entrance to the Red Line MBTA station. So if you have made that donation, this is the print that you'll be given. So Mass Ave has also been a big thing for me throughout my life. I moved to Boston when I was in high school, which is about 45 years ago now. I guess that ages me, but it's been a place where I've lived a lot of my life. I've traveled up and down the street, and it means a lot to me. And I just it's fun for me to be able to go and see the beauty of it. This is on the campus of MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It's actually a fairly well photographed place. I know that some friends of mine say, I've seen that picture 1,000 times, but this is the way that I saw it. One of the things that I'm trying to do, and I mentioned this, the project will go on, I'm sure, for years. It's just at the beginning of things. I'm really trying to open new ground in my photography, since again, I feel like I'm a fairly new photographer, or new to things. I need to take portraits. I need to get into businesses. I need to spend more time with people in the places that they live, as opposed to catching people passing by on the street. This one I particularly like, or that one I particularly like, just because that's a reflection of a bus of a bus stop. So you're looking down through the top of a glass bus stop. To the left side, where you see the upside down T, that's the Symphony Hall in Boston, and to the right is the Christian Science building and Horticultural Hall. And I was actually honored because this was recognized as one of the awardees that was mentioned at the very start. So I particularly like this image. Also, by the way, an iPhone image. You can keep scanning through, and I kind of try to talk about some things as we go and see the images. This is one of the old film images from back in the day. I used to shoot on a Nikon FM2, and so it's got a little extra grain to it, but it was fun to go through. And when I started the project and find that this was there on Mass Ave, it was across from the old Tower Records near the Berklee School of Music. This is a recent image on Mass Avenue near the Berklee School of Music as well. Hot summer night. One of the fun things about this past summer is that my son, who's 18, got his first job and was working at an ice cream store on Mass Avenue in Cambridge. And I was able to spend some time at night shooting, which is the first time I've done that, because this is actually about my bedtime most nights in Boston. I don't usually make it up to past 9 o'clock. So it was a good opportunity to pick him up after he was done with his shift, and I got some good night work done. And that last one was a good example of that. This is an old shot near Harvard University on Mass Ave. That young man is probably in his mid-30s now. There's a place in Boston where they, on Saturday mornings, they give out free food at a shelter, and dozens and dozens and hundreds of people will pass on through the area, and these folks were heading toward to pick up some food at that shelter.
Jeff?
Yes.
We have a question from the audience. You've kind of said you use an iPhone and you use several different cameras, but when you use your film camera, what lens do you prefer on the street?
So I use a prime. I actually carry 3 cameras with me most of the time. The iPhone is with me all of the time. So that's why a lot of them are that. I use a Ricoh GR3, and I use a Fuji X100F as well. So they all have prime lenses. Yeah, they're all prime. So I think the Ricoh is I want to say close to a 24, and the Fuji is probably about a 35.
Nice.
I use the Fuji probably the least of all of them, although it has the best image quality. And I think that's all I really have to say about my work. Like I said, it's going to be a long-term project. I don't see this being done for decades. Oh, this is an interesting one. This is an old one on that was shot on film back in the day as well. I have no idea whether that's a real gun or not. I'm assuming that it's not. But I didn't have the opportunity to ask. He was quite proud of it. And I don't know guns at all, but I've always wondered about that.
It's quite alarming to see this photograph at this point in our day.
Yeah.
So it is what you do on the Mass Avenue project seems to be quite relevant and long-term, a very rich book, I'm sure.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate the opportunity to be able to show the work. There's more of that's available on my website, which is jefflarison.com. And I'm always interested in feedback. And it looks like, from what I've been able to see of the crowd that's here, there's some amazingly talented people. And I would be honored to hear what you have to say about the project and the work, because I know that there's a lot more that needs to be done with it. So I'm always looking for input from anybody who wishes to give it.
Well, wonderful presentation, Jeff. And so we will all come together and share different things after everybody else presents. Looking forward to hearing more.
Thank you so much.
Jeff. Okay, excuse me. Now we would like to introduce Ryan Lafferty. Ryan is currently based in his childhood hometown of Riverside, California. After graduating from Northwestern University with honors, including time studying abroad in Paris, he moved on to a doctoral program in London focusing on art history and critical theory. His academic work examined how artistic, oops, and my screen just quit on me. I'm sorry. His academic work examined how artistic creation is influenced by our geography, and thus how art is a direct expression of a unique experience of space. While in London, he became deeply connected to the notion of psychogeography. I'm sure we'll hear more about that, and regularly undertook long-distance walks across the UK. Upon returning to California, he has tried to extend that sense of geographic exploration to the landscape of his childhood, surroundings that are simultaneously foreign and familiar to him. Ryan.
Thank you very much, Doug. Thanks to Ellen and Alexi as well at PPA for all their hard work and effort getting this organized. It's clear that this really is a passion of love based around both showing work and building a photographic community. And I think that that's really beautiful, and I'm flattered to be a part of it. It was great to hear from Jeff, and I look forward to hearing from the other two artists. It's truly incredible to be included with all three of them, and really flattering to see their work and hear them talk about it. So I think for me, for this project, it makes more sense to focus on process rather than a close reading of any individual image, though I'm very happy to talk about the photographs themselves. This series is explicitly meant to serve as fragments where every image comes together to hopefully create an atmosphere or a sense of place. As Doug sort of stated in my bio, this project started upon returning to my hometown in Southern California for an extended time, for the first time in over a decade. And then with the first lockdown, I started to accept that I'd be staying here for longer than I originally planned. And photography was sort of my natural catharsis that I turned to try to make sense of this landscape again. I've been photographing for what seems like my entire life. My father gave an old Canon F1 and some film when I was like 6 years old and told me to go figure it out. But for years and years abroad, my work was either commercial gigs or film-based, or if I shot digitally, it was exclusively black and white. But then returning home to Southern California, I would go out to photograph and I'd come back and I was always dissatisfied with the images I'd made, whether it was film or my typical black and white style as much as I had a style. So this project was really started with trying to unpack what I felt my photographs were lacking here, why I was feeling uninspired with what I was shooting, and trying to figure out a process and a photographic voice that matched my surroundings and where I was in life. So I guess I'll start talking about them, trying to unpack what I was working against to try to give a sense of what I was doing with the photographs themselves. So for one, I felt like what I normally look for in a striking black and white image didn't translate to my surroundings in Southern California. Our typical harsh light, like really bright sun, hazy, smoggy, overcast days, like big concrete expanses in suburban California didn't provide the contrast that I normally sought out in a black and white photograph. Another part that I've sort of always struggled with, but especially coming back here, was that in studying and writing about photography in academia for so long, I've always had a hard time detaching myself from my theoretical influences, from photographers that have influenced me, and really go out and shoot on my own vision and trying to find my own voice without having these like influences echoing in my head. And a big part of that was that in modern academia and photo theory, digital photography seems to be placed lower in the hierarchy of photography under film. I even years ago had a successful photographer and academic tell me that digital photography doesn't even count as a medium. And while I never bought into that fully, that still really struck with me. And for a while, I felt like my work couldn't be considered art unless it was on film. And part of that, like lower on the hierarchy in digital photography, stems from the idea of a film photograph being indexical. So the idea is that light is bouncing off a physical source and leaving an imprint onto the negative, like a footprint does in a fossil. And I had a hard time reconciling that with, okay, then what am I doing with digital photography then? And then finally, as mentioned in my intro, photography has always been inextricably linked to walking for me. Photography is the way that I sort of made sense of these long walks, of covering so much ground and passing through so many different places in one journey and trying to pick out details that somehow could make sense of this experience. And suburban California is famously not very pedestrian friendly. So all of these together meant that this series was an effort to confront these difficulties and hopefully forge a unique photographic perspective that matched my new surroundings. I was trying to capture this really strange experience of re-exploring a landscape that I knew so intimately from childhood, the street names, the geography. I have a map of this area in my mind that's ingrained in me from childhood, but I also simultaneously still feel really foreign or like on the outside here. Just for one, like I've never gotten stranger reactions and just been outright accosted on the street photographing more anywhere else in the world than I have 10 minutes from my house. So there's a strange disconnect there where I feel like I know this place, but I'm also separate from it. And I don't want to dwell on gear too much and nerd out about my kit, but this project was fundamentally linked to starting to focus on using Fuji digital cameras exclusively, and using these few Fuji bodies became a fundamental part of how I work. It opened up different color palettes to me and helped really change my ideas of the physicality of digital photography. So these cameras use APS-C, a smaller mirrorless sensor. They're more compact, they're less intrusive. They're smaller, easier to use. They have more analog controls. So they kind of took me back to my comfort place of shooting film. I also, for years doing any sort of gig work, shooting JPEG files was a taboo. You weren't a real photographer unless you shot RAW. But really embracing shooting JPEG kind of brought this project to life and showed me the importance and the physicality of the sensor itself in a digital camera. Shooting with a few different cameras, I realized that every generation of sensor has its own properties and that I couldn't recreate the exact same image from one model or one generation of camera to the next. And I started thinking about it and realizing that in digital photography, light is still interacting with this physically reactive source. It's still leaving an imprint on a physical thing, and that the camera, that physical thing, is changing how the picture looks. The file has been converted and stored as data, not on a negative, but even that data is stored on a hard drive or a SD card. So it still has a physical trace about it. For my own practice, I've always interacted with photography as a way of seeing. Photography for me personally is a way of expressing like a fleeting aesthetic sensation or an emotional experience I have from the landscape into an image that can be shared both with myself later and hopefully with someone else. It might be a bit pedantic, but I tend to refer to photography as a way of translating an image rather than capturing an image.
Brian,
Yep.
A few people would like to know whereabouts you do photograph. Where on the street? Are you in LA or are you outside LA? And another note is the light. Do you walk in the morning sometimes or late in the day to change that harsh light that we have in California?
Yeah.
Those are two different questions.
Yeah, those are all good questions. So this series in particular is all based in the Inland Empire. So a series of suburbs, sort of southeast of LA, about 60 miles. And it's not a defined region, so I maybe took some liberties because it has a really nebulous barrier. But they're all a series of suburbs. So I avoided the major metropolitan centers and stuck to suburbs. And in regards to light, a big part of this project was coming to terms with both shooting color and challenging myself with light that I would normally avoid. So I would go out specifically at different times of day, not necessarily to try to make a particular type of image, but to challenge myself and figure out how can I translate this early morning light with long shadows or this really golden light late in the day or harsh overhead light into an image that works. Like, how can I combine light and shape and my subject into something? So they're shot throughout the day from sunrise to sunset, and a lot of them right around noon.
Perfect.
Brian, I'd just like to relay something that was mentioned by Joan Dooley. She quotes you having said digital photography doesn't count. Somebody had said that to you. She says it sounds pretty anachronistic. Was that quite a while ago when you were told that by an academic?
This was in the last 5 years, and it was at a conference on photography, and I had given a presentation on a digital photographer, and I was yes, they had a personal gripe with me presenting digital photography like it could somehow be on par with film photography. And we can talk about that later, but that's something that I'm still really interested in now, where, even film photographs, we're going through a process of translating them into digital files to show online. So that boundary seems a lot more nebulous now, if there ever really was a boundary to begin with.
Yeah, it sounds like a boundary in that particular person's mind only, and it came out of his mouth or
I
her
think
mouth.
that it tends to be a more commonly held belief or theory in academics writing about photography rather than practicing photographers. But it was certain, maybe not to that extent of that particular writer. But the notion that digital photography was somehow lesser was very much ubiquitous. And so for me, I feel like I'm not trying to recreate the look of film or a film image. I'm not trying to like pass off my digital photos as being film, and I'm not trying to replicate the analog photography process, but rather take the best parts of film and what I learned from film and apply them to what I feel like are the best parts of digital photography. And part of that for me was shooting in JPEGs. So I would set up the camera to have the camera process the files as I was shooting, because I found when I shot a raw file, so the camera is not processing at all, I would go home, fire up Lightroom, put the images in, and try to recreate that color palette, that sense of, bright highlights, strong shadow that I felt when I was out in the landscape, and I never could. And that was part of my dissatisfaction. But then working with JPEG and tweaking the camera, I got to the point that I could take a picture, and what I shot really was a direct translation of what I felt at the time. So I could shoot something that was more or less how I saw it as I saw it. And that was really empowering to me. That helped me, both get more excited about my photographs, but also get out and shoot more, spend less time on the computer, spend more time exploring, more time walking, and more time taking photographs.
So you were actually editing on the fly.
Basically, yeah. So I would go out early in the day and take a few test shots, and then make a few tweaks in my camera's JPEG settings, and then say, okay, this is the film stock that I am going to use for the day. Just to use like film stock as a reference point, saying, all right, this is how this is what I'm seeing from the light and my surroundings, and then not really touch it. And that really helped me find some sort of congruence between what I was seeing and what I was experiencing, out in these suburbs, with what I ended up photographing.
Okay, we have one more question from one of our advisors, Rollins Patugan. He wants to know why there's the absence of people in your photographs. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, good question. Part of that comes from my own photographic influences. All the way back to like a French street photographer, Eugene Atget, whose shots were almost always absent of people, to new topographers like Baltz. And so the lack of people is obviously a very conscious decision, and part of that stems to my maybe unnecessarily abstract title, and this idea of simulacra or simulacrum, and photographs being symbols more than a complete whole. I felt like for me personally, if whenever I do like candid street portraiture, I couldn't detach myself from trying to project a narrative into each individual image. And I was trying to move away from an image itself as a self-contained story or whole, and have the image be a fragment that could then tell a larger story, hopefully. So the lack of people, I'm hoping that there's some sort of absence across the photographs. And for me, that helps the pictures be more vaguely familiar as opposed to definite. I hope that the photographs are at once recognizable as being somewhere, but not tied to a specific place. And the goal there is that then these photographs can tell the story of, you know, any suburb, that it doesn't matter whether I was in Corona or Pomona or Redlands, that together they create an atmosphere or a sense of landscape that I feel if there was a person in it, it would be more telling the story of a specific place. And I was trying to, this is also the photograph that I've had printed out for the raffle. And yeah, it was really fun to see it on paper.
That's fabulous. We are absolutely, it was a wonderful presentation. Your work is fabulous.
Absolutely.
And we're going to come back to you and the rest of the panel after we finish presenting the rest of the work. And I get the wonderful opportunity to introduce you to Nina Welch-Kling. Nina Welch-Kling is a New York City-based photographer. The German native combines her background in architecture and design with her love for roaming the city streets to inform her often mysterious photographic depictions of everyday life. Nina earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts with a focus in interior design from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in 1990, and a master's in architecture from UCLA in 1993. In 2020, Welch-Kling was a recipient of the Lens Culture Critics' Choice Award, as well as a finalist in the Lens Culture Street Photography Awards. Nina's work is also included in the book Women Street Photographers, edited by Gulnara Somalova, published by Prestel. In 2021, she was one of 8 women photographers named a Hasselblad heroine. Please welcome Nina.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, thank you, Ellen, Doug, Alexi, for giving me this opportunity to speak about my photography. Now, first of all, my photography is about love of observing the world around me. I love, love, love wandering the street. I love observing people. I love occasionally talking to people, but that's not usually the first, my first interest. And this is my series that I call Duologues, which is actually not a word that I made up, but it means a part of a play with 2 speaking roles for only 2 actors. And this series, I assembled the photographs into diptychs, and it's a project that actually was developed out of a class assignment. And I'm going to come back to that in a second. But so the oldest photo in the series is about 3 years old, and the newest one was just recently shot. So it's an ongoing project. And I came fairly late to architecture. I started I started photography about 10 years ago. And I became obsessed with improving and taking classes and learning from the many, many awful photos that I took. And it took me quite a while to figure out that, I don't know if you remember when you would drop off a roll of film after vacation and you would be super excited, and then you got the pictures back, and somehow those pictures just never represented what you had in your mind. And it took me a long, long time to figure out how to manipulate the lens and how to understand the camera settings to get closer to what I envisioned. And what I envisioned was a much more mysterious and photograph that I initially got. So I took so many street photos, and with each encouragement and with each better photo, I kept going. So then I ended up with this enormous amount of photos that I had taken. And somehow I wanted to connect these 2 photos that were taken in different times, in different places, into another story, a story that people could look at, a story where people linger on the pair for longer than just a minute to say, oh yeah, I got it, and make their own connections between the 2 photos. Now, not every photo is simple and easy to catch. So on purpose, some of them are very quick, like, oh, I got it. And some of them you have to look for them, for the connection in them. Some of them are composition, some of them are by shape. It could be negative space, positive space. But I also realized once I looked at my photos that there were a lot of similarities. I tend to look for people with hats or smoke or people with cigarettes. I mean, there's a reoccurring theme. And I also felt that, well, how can I connect them to another photograph to create another story? And so I created this system, and I don't know why I ended up with these two board games in my mind. One was a puzzle. So the diptych offered me a framework to create a different structure around my photographs. So all the photographs, to explain this, the diptych was the framework. And within this framework, I started to make these piles of similarities of photographs that made sense. The other game that I started to play was this kind of memory game in my head, or almost like a Rolodex. So I would pick a photo that I felt was a strong photograph and started to look through my Rolodex of photos in my memory to find a match. So this became very obsessive. And I think right now I have about 40, 45 duologues. And then, let's see what else I have. Mostly I look for mystery, and I usually like horrible weather. The worse the weather, the better. I like going out. My family always thinks I'm a little crazy when I go out in the blizzard, but I love the extra layer and element that adds to the photograph. And then I also think that what's interesting to me is that people always think of street photography of this kind of random encounter of observation. But I feel that, yes, it's random, but I tend to go back to places because the randomness gives me something that I can discover from. And so this discovery makes it a lot more, more predictable. So I know that if there's a light in a corner of a street, or if there is a certain place that I like, I will go back to places all the time. And in any case, I kept shooting and shooting. And also I felt it's important. What I wanted to mention is that I've been working with a mentor in a group of actually students for the last 3-4 years. And it's been very helpful to create this project within this group that I felt very safe and comfortable with. And it's good to have this other voice that helps me stay focused, or sometimes we get very attached to photos, and it's good if you have somebody that you trust to help you move this project along. And I can talk about a couple of the individual pairs.
Okay, Nina, I have to interrupt you while you get your thoughts on those individual pairs to let you know that Joe Reed is said, I'm sorry, what kind of brilliant mind can first take these images and then later be able to put them alongside each other? The second brilliant and amazing image. My brain hurts right now trying to understand this.
Maybe I wasn't really clear, but it basically, when I come home and look at this image, and I guess I keep track in my mind. I have these collections on my computer. And I look for these connections. Like, this is a harder connection. And I mean, I almost don't want to give away what people see in it. But, you know, it's old and young. It's the cigarette line becomes the line of the balloons. The celebration becomes the older person. So some of them are much more a storytelling, and that's my story. But I think if you look at the photograph, it becomes a very different story. I mean, I think here, this pair is a little bit more obvious, just because it's a shape and it's a more formal connection. But again, it's the water, one it's melted and one it's on the ground. So each one of them has multiple layers. Again, I always feel like it's my vision to tell you, but I'm interested to hear what other people see in them. And I think that's, especially this one is a much more conceptual one. So if anybody wants to take a try to tell me what they see in it, I'd be quite interested.
So Nina, El Mesral, I see few images with beautiful styling element. In this, is this random people you get to photograph on the street, or are you choosing to style it in your own way yourself?
They're all random.
They're all random.
All of these photographs are candid. So none of the photographs are, so this is the idea of going back to places like for example, I love uniforms in terms of geometry, in terms of the color, the black and white. And so I will choose Fleet Week to go out and shoot, because I know on that day, my chances of finding somebody in a uniform where I find the connection, I have a much better chance of getting a photograph. But then light is super important in most of my photos. So I think initially it was very hard for me to get my images in focus. So shooting at f/16 is definitely very helpful. So when it's a very contrasty light, it's a lot easier to get these quick seconds and these quick photos.
Another unconventional way that you photograph perfect timing is pairing black and white and color, which is usually a taboo, but you're doing this very effectively. How are you managing this?
Well, in the beginning, or very initially, I was told that, yeah, that's not really what I should be doing. But I felt like in this one, the connection is clear. I feel like the person on the left is hiding just like the person on the right, but the person on the right is more of a silhouette. The person on the left becomes this other person. So I feel that it's more of a feeling for me. And so I'm just doing it.
So you're saying that you're responding intuitively to the images and putting them together just to see what happens when you pair them?
Well, like I knew that in the pair before, I'm sorry, it was about the hidden figures, or about, both of them carrying something, but each in a different way. And I also, in terms of going out and shooting them, I often get asked the fishing and hunting question, and I'm sure people, or might not be familiar with it, but basically fishing is that you stand there for a while and you wait for something interesting to come. The hunting is you kind of run, or you move more around and go after things. The guy with the flowers was hunted, and the person with the box was fished, if that's a good word.
Right.
So it always depends, and I will maybe stand on a corner because the light is amazing, but then I see something in the corner of my eyes and I start walking and following that person.
Right.
So Nina, another question is, have you always shot vertically, or how did this develop? And second part from Mark Karzan is, how large do you print these photographs?
So I think I shoot vertically because that's part of my architectural background, possibly. And I also think it's because it's less a storytelling, but it's more about a subject, and it's more about the composition. And that's just how I see the world. So I always, or primarily, shot that way, which is, I know it's unusual. And I'm sorry, the second question was
how large do you print?
I print them pretty big. So they individual ones could be 20 by 30 next to each other.
And then do you print them together, or are they printed separately and then framed together, or just individual? Or, are they actual dual?
Ideally, they're actually printed on a piece of paper, on one piece of paper. But they could be, because I know sometimes it's a little difficult, they could be printed on individual papers, but frameless, and then put together fairly close so that you don't lose the connection.
They're absolutely wonderful. You're giving everybody in the audience a feast for their eyes and their intellect.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Do you have a print that you're going to share for the raffle?
I do, which is one of my earliest photographs, but also very New York and snow, of course.
It's a wonderful
Amazing.
print. And if anybody would like to,
Beautiful.
Giving Tuesday, you can still give and help us keep these shows going free and for you. There you go, Doug. Our last presenter is
Okay. Great. Oh, and like to introduce Randy Erickson now. Randy has been practicing amateur photographer for the past 47 years. After college, he taught art K through 12 on an Indian reservation in Nevada. He moved to Seattle in 1978 and was hired as the driver docent of the Washington State Artmobile. That job helped to finance his co-ownership of a punk art gallery in Seattle in the late 70s, early 80s. While in Seattle, he made his living by photographing other artists' work, screen printing posters and t-shirts, doing graphics, sign print painting, model making, and odd jobs in art. Aren't they all odd jobs in art? He art directed a few small independent films in Seattle before moving to Los Angeles in 1990 to work in the film business full time. He has been making his living as a property master for film and television for 30 plus years. Throughout his television career, he has continued to use photography to make pictures and has had several shows in galleries, shops, and cafes. Randy looks forward to having more free time to spend on art and photography. Randy,
Yes.
so pleased to have you with us and to hear you and see you.
Oh, I know. We had a rough start with the Wi-Fi, but hopefully you can see me now and hear me now.
We can.
Yes. Good evening, and thank you, Doug and Ellen and Alexi. I'd also like to acknowledge Bill Wishner for his contribution to Pasadena photography arts over the years. I'm honored to be presented with this group of excellent photographers on tonight's open show. It's kind of a hard act to follow. So what you just heard on Prop Master, and the title of my presentation is Shooting Blanks. And you might be reminded of the shooting tragedy on the film set in New Mexico recently. I don't really want to talk about that tonight, but that awful event has made me think of other titles for this series. Drawing Blanks, Gone But Not Forgotten, or better yet, Forgotten But Not Gone. These pictures are a visual metaphor for forgetfulness and memory loss that often comes with aging. Faded and forgotten memories, images like memories, become something that was once clear and is now clouded by age and distress. As I get older, I've had a senior. It happens all the time. It happens to all of us to one degree or another. And sometimes it can evolve into serious memory lapses, dementia, or even to Alzheimer's. I'm no medical expert, but I know it affects millions of people, and mostly everything and everyone you ever knew or loved. And all that's left are vestiges of something that was once there, not what it was, not nothing, but something else, something forgotten, but not gone. Well, now that I've continued, yes, I will. I've always loved 1 hour photo finishing shops, you know, the photomats and such would often print the word pictures or memories on their envelopes. And that's what this series is all about, is pictures and memories, or lack thereof. The theme for tonight's show is street photography. And I guess you might say, you could tell from looking at my photos, I'm more of an alley photography kind of guy. I've been working with this series for several years, and I often post on social media using the hashtag pictures of nothing. I use the word pictures because a picture can be a photograph, a painting, a drawing, multimedia, including film, as in the phrase, you ought to be in pictures. My pictures are photographs, collages, and manipulations. I like very much the idea that many of my photographs don't look like photographs at all. pictures of nothing might imply that they don't mean anything, but somehow they take on more significance as we look for meaning because a photograph was taken of them. It's funny, I've never been a huge fan of abstract art at all in general. I've been quoted as saying, art is like a joke. Either you get it or you don't. And I don't get it. Or if you do get it, you don't want it. Like a bad pun. Well, folks, now the joke is on me. I can certainly understand if someone might not get my pictures. I guess I've changed my tune a little bit about abstract art in general. I mean, just look at these pictures. And yeah. So it's kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like a dream you've had when you wake up. You've had a vivid dream. You start your day in the shower, and halfway through it, you start thinking about your dream, and you're thinking of your day ahead. You remember parts and bits and pieces, and if something comes back in your mind, you kind of have a blank spot, and you think, well, it was just a dream. So like memories lost in time, like tears in the rain. I stole that line from Rutger Hauer in Blade Runner. Maybe it'd be better, more original to have like memories lost in time, like tears in the shower. I use my camera to document things that I find or that find me. More than one person has affected what I find before I even take a photograph. Someone has either pasted, scraped, painted, defaced, screwed, glued, and tattooed stickers, posters, or whatever before I come along. And the element of chance combines with it, weathering, aging, and fading. I've installed some of my actual pictures outside in the elements, sometimes for years, and I welcome the changes that happen by chance, and sometimes it's even an improvement, quite often. So as a prop guy and a photographer, I've often thought of the Hitchcock movie Rear Window, and as you may recall, Jimmy a photographer in a wheelchair, and Raymond is flash bar and flash bulbs, and his hands are shaking much like mine are right now. And he's putting in the bulbs and flashing Raymond Burr in his eyes. He has a blank spot, and then some cheesy effect, red dots, and then he's reloading. I just always love that scene. So this is just like another case of shooting blanks. He was not shooting film, he was just using the flash bulbs for self-defense. The prop guy must have had a fun day that day. They probably went through dozens of
Oh, Randy, come back. We've been having a little trouble with your wife.
Oh, I know, it's been a trouble. Shall I stop?
No, Randy,
You're
I
back.
want you to know, we're just going to go back. We're just going to go back a little bit to where you stopped, but I want you to know, Randy, you're giving a wonderful view. I have to read one of our comments here. Larry says, I love these. Makes me think of Rothko paintings, but the detail brings them to a high level. Okay, stunningly beautiful. Your work is being really well received. So find your pace. It's good. Oh, we lost you again.
Yeah, I'd just like to interject
Oh yeah,
something.
I'm here.
Another great street photographer, Gary Winogrand, said that he had never seen an abstract photograph. And it's something essential about the medium that whatever we photograph, even if it's an image that ends up being manipulated, it's still not really abstract. It's based on something that's out there in the world. Even cameraless images, I think, are not really abstract.
Mhm.
And these are really no exception. I mean, they're incredibly nuanced and varied and engaging in just the way I'm not going to make correlations between this and images of people in the streets, for instance, but this for me is still very much street photography. And if anything, it helps expand what street photography can be.
And one of our guests here has mentioned Aaron Siskin, who definitely was of this, genre. So the abstract that you have gotten in your alleyways is definitely being seen and felt and resonating.
Oh, very good. Thank you. It's great to have the input. I'm sorry, I have such the crummiest connection, but if you can hear me, and I'll just keep going a little bit more.
Yeah, please do.
Just have a little prepared thing.
Yeah.
Well, for me, it's called the indecisive. So Henry Cartier-Bresson and the decisive moment, that perfect moment of action in the scene, where all the elements come together, and Bresson would snap the shutter at just the right time, the decisive moment. Well, for me, it's the indecisive moment. I'm walking down the street and I see something, a smudge or a splotch or something on the wall, and I'll stop and think, well, should I take a photo of that? Or maybe I should come back and take a photo, or wait till the light's better. Would that make a good picture? And kind of indecisive. So I usually go back and take a picture, because with digital photography, you can just shoot a million shots and it doesn't cost much. I mean, in the olden days, I used to shoot film, but I would shoot a lot less because of the cost of, film and processing and printing and all that. So, so that's about it. Oh, I wanted to make one last statement. As speaking of great street French photographers, the new documentary called Paper and Glue by JR is really, really good. I would encourage all of you to go see it if you haven't already. JR's work shows us that art can change the world, or at least make the people who he photographs and includes in his project feel much less forgotten. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right.
Randy, do you have a photograph that you're donating for the raffle?
I do, right here. So I just hold it up. It's a photo collage I did several years ago. Ooh, kind of abstract, but it's based in reality.
When you say photo collage, specifically, what are you referring to?
Well, I start with, sometimes I scan old rotten paper, wallpaper, and in this case, and I scan it for just patterns and images, and digitally in Photoshop, I collage and I put them together that way. So it's kind of like painting with images.
Right.
Making it, right.
Great. Thank you for that. Ellen, is this a good time perhaps to have each of our presenting photographers maybe ask questions or make comments about each other's work?
That sounds like a fabulous idea. So
is there anything that any of you've seen that stimulates some ideas?
Oh,
I think it's amazing how different all these projects are. And I think it's fascinating that they all fall under the category of street photography. People know people abstractions. And I think, that the lesson to be learned is that street photography is such a big box to be put in. And it's perfectly okay to be in that box. And not to fit into that box, or be outside of the box, but somehow we all kind of fit into it. And it's incredible, from the colors and the abstraction and the black and white. I mean, they're all, I feel they're so different, and yet so much talent.
So this is a really interesting point you raised, because street photography, when you have submissions, falls into a very narrow scope. And we have just seen 4 different takes on what street photography looks like. So in our world today, how can we push those boundaries, where a diptych is also a street photograph, an extended frame, or individual photographs, or a photograph that's more abstract, that has a traditional nuances. How can we change the vocabulary that seems to be pretty narrow when we are trying to submit our work to different kind of competitions and things to get our work out there?
Yeah, well, the problem is the last part of your sentence, and that is you want to work outside the box. There should be no box for an artist.
No box.
Period. But when you submit your picture to wherever you submit them to, you're at the whim of the person that's been appointed to judge that, and therein lies the problem. In terms of the way we've set it up in photography. By the way, I want to go back to Randy for a second. He's like my brother, and I don't even know him very well. But I look at his work and I see my own work in there. For the years that I've been doing out in the streets and in the alleys, one way or the other. It's I actually emailed you, Ellen, for Randy's email, and Randy, I'm going to contact you.
Okay.
And we're going to talk. Where do you live? The city.
I live in Glendale.
Perfect. I'm in Pasadena. It's close by.
Yeah.
Oh, so Jay Ross
Very
to
good.
everybody says, my street photography becomes travel if I shoot in a foreign land. Yeah, that's a tricky one because geography plays a really important part in collecting or making a photograph. When I photograph in New York or I photograph in Hong Kong, there is a different kind of element that's picked up in the electricity on the street or lack thereof, right? So when you take a travel photograph, what exactly does that mean to you, Jay, wherever you are? Can you elaborate? Where are you?
Ellen, let me take a crack at that. Since I'm just about to take off for Spain to do a show. And as you know, I've spent 54 months working in Vietnam. So that's a question that comes up a lot in my own head. But actually, I'm not really sure what the point of the question is. Just like Cartier-Bresson, or like any other journalist, photographers working for magazines, they'll photograph all over the world. I'm not really sure that there's really a point in trying to understand any differences in the way they perceive things, because we all perceive things through what we feel, how we react, and what kind of a person we are, and what all our own personal history is like. So I guess that to me, to have that conversation, I would need somebody to clarify why the question was even have value.
Your site dead?
So Jay just clarified, he's on an iPhone. It was really difficult. So it was more of a statement that travel photography sometimes gets a little bit confused, I suppose, as far as street, but we can just pass.
Do people shoot differently? Like I can only speak for myself, but I will shoot very similarly. I don't think you could identify, unless it's a building, that it was in New York. I mean, there are some photos in my Duologues or in my that were not shot in New York, and I don't think you would know. I think it's the same approach.
Well, that comes with being seasoned, working for years on the street, getting your legs, getting your view, your own point of view. So that I totally agree with that. I imagine, Doug, you would probably. We become one with our camera and one with the way we see, and we take that to wherever we go.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there are certainly travel photographers who don't necessarily fall into this, but traditionally we think of travel photography as being something that maybe the Chamber of Commerce would be applauding, that it's about promoting the place in ways that are attractive and street photographers are not interested in that at all. I mean, it might happen, and certainly there are street photographers who've been hired by publications over the years to shoot and get a more interesting take on things. But generally speaking, we open, Traveler or Travel and Leisure or one of those publications with the idea that we're going to get some pretty pictures of a place, and with the idea of us being enticed to go there. And street photographers don't have that kind of constraint on them. Fortunate.
So I kind of like to wrap up one last question with how I know that for me, I shoot manually on the street. I usually have everything set up and I'll make that first click and then I'll make adjustments, and I use my ISO to change things. How do you individually, I know we've talked about it a little bit in your presentations, but when you're on the street and you walk out there, do you practice, do you warm up, or do you just go out and shoot? And is there one particular camera lens that is your baby? Ryan, would you like to go?
Sure, yeah, that's a good question, and I will always talk about gear forever. So for the second part of that question, I find I have a Fuji X70, one of their older generation compacts that has an 18.5 prime on it. And then I also shoot with 23 prime and 35 prime as my main cameras. And I tend to just shoot with one focal length at a time and really sort of find a fluidity with a particular focal length. I finally accepted to like get over my pride of shooting full manual, and I tend to shoot aperture priority most of the time, especially during the daylight. So I really take advantage of Fuji's exposure compensation dials. It's one of my favorite parts of the camera. So I'll kind of determine what I'm going for in regards to focal length and depth of field, and then let the camera figure out the shutter speed and play around with spot metering. So whether like exposing for the highlights versus the shadows, and then tweaking my exposure compensation to get the exposure where I want it. And I tend to move pretty quickly. I guess digital photography kind of offers that perk, that there's lower consequence every time you hit the shutter. But that's also just kind of my own sensation, and the feeling that I'm trying to translate is a sense of moving through space in these fleeting images. So I try not to labor over one thing too much. But yeah, pick a couple primes, set aperture priority, and go for it.
Great. Nina, how do you approach your street?
I shoot manual, and I guess my biggest problem could be, so I expose for the highlights, because if I overexpose, the photo is gone, and I shoot so often very high contrast. So they're often quite underexposed. I shoot the Fuji X100V often, so that's a 23 millimeter, which I think crop is 35. But if it's kind of a gray day, I kind of find my setting and I just adjust usually while I go along, but it's full manual.
Do you feel that you need to warm up when you start on the street, or are you one of those people that is intuitive? You see a shot and you see it.
I need to warm up, and if I hadn't gone out for a couple of days, I feel like you need to kind of take a deep breath and kind of find your rhythm and go and start walking and start seeing things.
Great. Jeff, how do you approach the street?
Well, I'm manual as well. Usually I just, because the Ricoh fits in my hand best, I usually have that as I'm strolling around. I'll strap the Fuji over my shoulder, and if I can't get close enough with the Ricoh, then I'll use the Fuji, and the iPhone, which comes out a lot, is you have no choice with regard to what you're doing with that.
Cool. And where is Randy? Randy, there you are. Unmute.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not so sure. Okay, Doug, how do you approach the street? We talked about this. Give everybody your secrets.
Yeah, well, I'm at the risk of blasphemy. I actually shoot. I have very specific settings, and but I use some of the automatic in my camera. I also shoot with a zoom, which I know is like, that's really heretical. But I'm 71. It has partly to do with that. I like autofocus. But when I go into the street, it's usually I like giving myself an opportunity to kind of warm up and get into the process. which usually means taking shots that I know I say, these are going to be terrible, and give myself permission to make terrible pictures. And within the first 5 minutes, I've forgotten that particular comment to myself, and I'm off and running. But I feel I need that. I need to be able to fail and not worry about it.
Cool. Randy, can you hear us?
Yes. Yes, I am sorry. Technical difficulties tonight, man. So for me, as far as gear goes, I'm not a gear guy. I have an iPhone 8 that I use a lot, but I also have a Canon SLR I use it. I go on automatic. To me, it's not about the gear or any of that. I mean, I've done plenty of slopping around in dark rooms, black and white dark rooms, all night, trying to get a perfect print that I can get on my phone now in 3 minutes. It's so, and as far as camera goes, the best camera to have is the one you have with you.
Right.
Whatever camera you have, you've heard that before, but so that's just my take on it. To me, it's more about the idea than the equipment. It's not the how you do it, it's what you're doing.
Right. That's perfect. And Ibernex has a wonderful question for the panel. Can any of you talk about your process for culling and selecting your images? Do you wait a while after making them, or do you know right away and you're there?
So does he just interview everybody all the time? Is he like always asking questions? It's in his blood. So I have started to wait a long time with my images now. I'll shoot it and let it sit on the card until the card is pretty close to full, and then I'll go back and look at them. So I have some space and time between the time that I shoot and work with it. I mean, the process of narrowing things down for the book that I did, Sonder, that was leaving pictures on the wall here for months at a time and moving things around, but then that's a different animal for me.
Right. Anybody else have a way of how they select and cull, and if they, put everything in your Lightroom and then walk away for a year?
Or walk away or more. You can walk. I walked. Some of my best work was from work that I've done 10 years ago that I revisited and said, "Oh my God, I missed that completely." And once I print it, or once I get it on the computer and print it again, I fall in love with it all again. But it's taken me 10 years to do that.
Yeah, actually, that makes me, not to take too much of the conversation, but I had a hip replacement surgery a couple months ago, and so I've been sitting in this chair for the last couple of months, not able to shoot. And going back through the archive has really been, I found some lovely things that I completely passed over a long time ago. It was nice to have that time, unable to walk or do anything else.
Well, I'm recovering from a bout of COVID, and I've been housebound and hospital bound for the last 3 months. I have to take my cameras out to remind me that they're still there in the drawer. But I'm looking forward to the time when I can get out on the street again and do some shooting. But I'm thankful to be here with all you guys.
It's great to have you with us, Bill.
Thank you.
I think also you can, one of the aspects of selection involves what your intention was to begin with. So if you're trying to cull this down because you've got a book and that book has so many images that's going to be in it, and you're starting out with 10,000, that's a different challenge for you than if you're starting out with either fewer images, or perhaps the goal is to create a portfolio of, say, 20 images, or even a museum exhibit of 40. So the amount of what you're doing and where you expect this to end up and who is it for and what do you want them to get out of it, there's a lot of questions I think you have to ask yourself.
Agree. Absolutely agree. Is there anybody else that has a question for our 4 wonderful street photographers?
Well, I have a question for you, Ellen. What's your process?
Oh, well, I actually don't warm up. I actually am one of those people that I walk out on the street and I see shape and light, and I'm just attracted right away. It doesn't mean that it's good or that I made a photograph, but I just see things and I record right away, and then I just keep clicking. I'm a massive clicker. which I'm trying to change, because that means that I come back to my Lightroom with thousands of photographs and then I have to edit. So my new 2022 resolution is to shoot less and be much more intentional. But that's, and I do shoot on auto, on fully manual, as crazy as that sounds. There we go. This has been an absolutely wonderful open show. So happy to see all of you with us. And Doug, any last parting words for our panel and our wonderful guests?
No, absolutely exceptional work. And you've all had interesting things to say, very intriguing things to say about very intriguing work. And the range is just astonishing to me. You know, what can comprise street photography. Eye-opening and wonderful to experience.
Yes. So
thank you all so
much for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
It's been our pleasure.
All right. See you all next time on Forum, next in, I think it's January. So we're taking a little break in December, but we will be back and there'll be another open show in February. And so wishing everybody a really healthy holiday, new year, and be safe, get your booster, get vaccinated, be well, and see you soon.
Okay. Thanks, you very
everybody.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Good night.
It's been great.
Great job, everyone.